Um, we're going to now, I'm not going to introduce you to some ideas about how to improve and extend your arguments for your papers. As we know, we always have supporting materials for our evidence, if you will, our proof for our premises. But once you have your premises, you have to sometimes fine tune them. The thing you have to remember about a paper and your premises is that once you get it together, okay, and then you start doing research, you may have to fine tune it every now and then. You may have to make some changes, and there's nothing wrong with that because as you find more evidence, you will, it's being able to. How do I say it? It's being able to make the evidence speak to your position quite well. So now, when you begin with an issue, you may not necessarily begin with a position on an issue. So you might have to, go out and look at things and decide where you want to go. You shouldn't always have to feel you have to immediately embrace some position when trying to shore it up with arguments. That's easy to say, of course, when you're not trying to push people into writing papers that they have to write very quickly. And I understand that. But in an ideal world, if it's a 16-week course or whatever, or 15-week course, you have a little bit of time sometimes to have the luxury of being able to try to shore up your positions. Now, if you have a position, don't just dash off the first argument that occurs to you. You might want to do that as a rough draft, but you're also going to want to do some research. Don't just accept it, what your position is. I mean, it's okay. But at the same time, don't just, make sure that you refine it. You also have to can begin by being asked to arrive at a well-informed opinion that can be defined with solid arguments. So that's why the fine tuning, why it's important. Okay. And here's some good example as we're thinking about this. Is there life on other planets? And we can use this as a good one. Now, Carl Sagan says that, puts it this way. That is, Carl Sagan says that is, but why? How could how could he or we argue the point? How can we argue this? How do we, without sounding like we need little guys with coats to come pick us up? And when you think about as you think about this, you look at how he explores the issue. Here is just one line of thought that some astronomers suggest. There are some billions of stars in our galaxy alone, and billions of galaxies in the universe. If even a tiny fraction of all these stars have solar systems of their own, and even a tiny fraction of those have planets suitable for life, and even a tiny fraction of those actually have life, still there must be a myriad of planets with life. The number of chances is still unimaginably huge. And when you put it in that context, in this scientific context, you're not you're not trying to be what's the word I want to use here? We're not trying to be we're not trying to be conspiracy theorists here, or whatever, UFO hunters. But when you look at it in this way, he has phrased it in such a way that it's actually, possible. There'll be others that will probably have other criteria. That's their criteria. This is Carl Sagan's criteria. And to work on that, that's what you're going to have to kind of work on as you get further on. Then the question is why do some people have doubts? Well, if you find that people have different reasons for your argument, whatever your issue is, let's find out. Continuing with Carl Sagan's example, some scientists might point out that we really have no idea how common habitable planets might be, or how likely it is to develop one, or develop on them. I mean, we don't because, to be perfectly honest, we haven't been to other planets. As such, we've been to, and I mean physically, we've sent space probes to the moon and other parts of the galaxy, but we haven't actually been to another planet. A lot of it's guesswork. Critics are going to argue that, you know, life elsewhere, rather intelligent life, by now should have announced itself, which they say hasn't happened. You know, and that's a possibility. You know, all the arguments carry some weight, and much more needs to be said. We know that. Intelligent life. Well, there's a good example there. How do we define what is intelligent life? And that's what becomes important. Now, you already see then that unexpected facts or perspectives may well turn up as you begin to research this topic, and as things pop up, and maybe you'll want to include them in your argument. Unexpected facts happen all the time. And what's important is that if it's important to your paper or your issue, you can't ignore it. Okay. And what I mean by that is you know, if you are researching something and you find a major, not even major, but you find a significant evidence for something, you have to consider it, because if you don't bring it up, and then later someone were to find out that, you know, let's say you published a book or something, and you well may. And if you know, and they'll ask questions like, well, you did the research. Why didn't you come up with this? Another thing is you can be surprised. Be ready for evidence and arguments that you may not like. It's always easy to argue from a position where you have a good feeling for it. And that's why, you know, in this class, I try to come up with some topics that are topical, okay? But be ready, you know, be ready to listen to arguments. You know, don't be closed-minded. You know, be ready to let yourself be swayed by the evidence that is being presented, okay? Again, continuing on, find out why someone has doubts. Find out why, as much as we look at different issues that are controversial, not all issues are controversial, but think about, true thinking when you think about this is really an open-ended process. And the point is that you don't know when you start where you're necessarily going to find yourself in the end. I'm always surprised at some of the things that I find out and some of the things that I uncover when I do some reading as well. This happens more and more, especially in my field and especially in history, where new evidence is being developed all the time, new methods, and that doesn't mean that you're wrong, but it might mean that it casts doubt on something you maybe previously thought. And the other thing too is even if you think that some popular answer or idea is wrong, it's worth including here because you will want to understand why people believe it. It's one of these things. Think about it in this term. Think about it in these terms. Think of it in terms of our taste buds. Everyone has their own unique taste buds. And we all like things that taste good to us. Some things we like, some things we don't like. But then, now you have to figure out why when you come across somebody who dislikes something that you like dearly. For example, it's like one of those things that, let's say you have a favorite ice cream, and all of a sudden coming across a friend or somebody who says, "Oh, I don't like ice cream," and you have to figure out How could they not like ice cream? Because you like it so much, how could they not like it? I mean, how is that possible? And it's hard to figure out. I mean, really, it is. It's hard to, understand why people don't agree um, when, for yourself, the answer is so clear cut. Okay, so once you see the arguments for the answer, you may find it more plausible. Okay, and of course, you don't want to forget sometimes that be prepared. You have to be prepared to respond to other people. One of the most contentious issues, you don't need to roll out the same arguments that everyone has heard 1,000 times. So, think about some of the other issues. Think of different ways to argue an issue. As that's what we're trying to do. Look for creative new approaches. You could even try to find common ground with the other side in a short talk, the time to choose your direction carefully, aim to make some real progress on the issue, and even from within given positions. So it's important. But even if your questions are considering is phrased as a yes or no question, think about the answers that start with yes, but, or no, but, okay? So think of a variety of positions too. That's the other thing. You want to think of a variety of positions for your topic as well. And that's important too. Hang on one sec. Okay. Consider nuanced answers, that yes, but only if, and some of these questions are thinking out there that people would think about, okay? In other words, as you try to figure out how whether people or other people have different questions, think about this. Suppose you are considering the issue of global poverty. Okay. Do you want to know, exactly what questions are you trying to answer about global poverty? Do you want to know what life is like for the global poor? Okay. Do you want to know how the current disparity between developing countries and developing and underdeveloped countries can be? Are you trying to figure out whether people in developed countries have a moral obligation to help the global poor? There's a good question. What could we do to help them? Or are you trying to answer some kind of other question about global poverty? Think about how you want to put it together. Okay. Once you have specific questions in mind, try to identify potential answers to that question. Okay, you don't have to include every possible answer. That's not what, and we don't have that time. But focus on answers that are either plausible and perhaps even popular. Okay. If you think there's a significant chance that some answer is correct, include it. If you know that many other people of at least, or at least a few well-informed people, thoughtful people endorse a particular answer, well, include that one too, either whether you agree with it or not. Even if you think some popular answers or ideas are wrong, okay, it's worth including here because you'll want to understand and be able to prepare yourself in a paper for what objections might come up. Once you see the arguments, you may find it even more plausible yourself. Don't forget to include nuanced answers, even if the questions are considered in phrasing such as yes or no or whatever. Okay. Similar qualifications, for instance, if you're considering whether or not to go to medical school, think it out. Do you just, if you were asking yourself, do you want to go to medical school? The answer is not always a simple yes or no question. You want to consider more nuanced answers, but yes, but only if I could get a good financial aid package. Well, there you go. What are some of the possibilities? Here are some questions that you might want to consider too. If you were considering things, and we would use these more as a a place to, if this were a face-to-face course, we'd stand here and kind of think of ideas. Questions to consider. Should marijuana be legalized? There's a question. And these are not yes or no answers here. Should we, what's the pro and the con here? And sometimes I hate to say pro and con. What are the different thoughts behind this? You have the one side that says, for years, and going back to the 90s, I've always said that this is such a ridiculous thing that, by making it more forbidden, I think we've created a worse problem. So there's one answer. Another answer is that a lot of people, still believe that it should be a class 1 drug and that it's a gateway drug for people. Not necessarily. It could be. But on the other hand, you've got a lot of people who smoke cigarettes, and isn't that sort of a gateway drug too sometimes? Could be. A lot of people might say, well, no, that's different because it's legal. Well, why? It's still a drug, you can see where I'm going, Should developers be allowed to destroy the habitats of endangered species in order to build new housing developments? Should we increase taxes on the richest 1% of Americans to fund programs to help middle-class households? These are not yes or no. Should colleges require students to get regular exercise? There's a good question. How should schools measure how well teachers are doing on their job? Is there life on other planets? How should someone in his or her 20s save for retirement? Is it wrong to download copyright media without paying for it? There's a lot of us can answer that. So when you're thinking about this, when you're thinking about an issue, just do some free thinking on it. Type it on a blank piece of paper, write it out in longhand. Remember that you're constructing an argument. So, you're going to need a specific conclusion backed by evidence and reasons that you provided, your causes, your premises. Your premises is the evidence here. And as you begin to formulate a position, then take it, then take a basic idea, frame an argument, okay? Literally draft premises and literally draft your premises and conclusions in an outline. Think about this. Aim first. One of the best ones is to think about is to aim first for hang on, what did I do? Yeah, aim first for relatively short arguments, say 3 to 5 premises. That's all you would need to do. You don't need to have, you're not writing a Nobel Prize winning piece here. You're just, thinking about it. And then, think about this. Is there life on other planets? What are some 3 or 4 arguments you can make for that? Life on other planets. Here's a good one. And this is one that you might work out. Life on other planets might be put into premises and conclusions like this. This is an example. Other planets, let's see. Other planets, a solar system are being discovered. Other planets and other solar systems are being discovered beyond our own. If there are other solar systems beyond our own, then it's very probable that there are other planets like Earth. If there are other planets like Earth, then it's very probable some of them have life. Therefore, it's probable that there is life on some other planets. Can we, how do we know? Well, that's the thing. We're talking about a probability here. We're not talking about extensive evidence. Have we been to other planets? Well, we've been to Mars, and not physically, but we've been as far as sending Mars rovers and things like that. So we know at least there is something out there. Propose that you develop and defend a proposal. That's why people propose expanding the student exchange program, blah, 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 blah. Okay? So, if let's say you're writing a proposal and you're trying to think about a student exchange program, okay? And the question that you have to provide to your, let's say your boss or some committee, that why you need to expand this program in the face of lowering money, then let's think about this. So what do we think about? Think of some things that would improve the student, what would a student exchange program do? Well, first, it's good for students. Students who travel abroad learn to appreciate different countries. That's a good idea. More appreciation between different countries would be good. And also we should send more students. Therefore, we should send more students abroad. Now, this is the basic idea. It might be a little too basic. It hardly says enough, much more than give a specific assertion. Okay, and so if you're trying to do a proposal and you're trying to, save money, you're trying to get a program to spend money on this program. This is not, this may not be the way to do it. It may have won you some money in the past, but in the face of competitive funds, you're going to need something. So the thing is now we should probably think about, okay, why would more appreciation between different countries be good? And now we have to get to the basic arguments. Why is this such a good thing? How does sending students abroad how does that produce more appreciation? Okay. And even this is a basic argument. We need a little more work here. You need to work this out further. And so what you would want to do is expand possibly, depending on how much space and time that you need to invest in this. But think about, okay, this is an idea. Why would we want this? And you can go further than that. Let's think of a better idea. Okay, so we're going to make a bigger argument here. So let's produce a proposal. Students who travel abroad learn to appreciate other countries. Students who travel abroad become person-to-person ambassadors who help their hosts appreciate students' home countries. More appreciation both ways will help us better coexist and cooperate in our interdependent world. Therefore, we should send more students abroad and even spend money on this program. Now, you may even try several different conclusions here. You might even have varied conclusions, before you find a specific basic argument on a topic here. But again, it's going to take time and thought to go through it. Now, we don't always have that, but at least, you can get into the process of thinking about this. Now, after you've settled on a conclusion, you're going to definitely want to defend it. And you're going to have to try several forms of the argument before you find one that's really going to work well. Okay. And that's basically, what you have to do. We got to provide some kind of evidence for what we're talking about. All right. And that's what we've been doing all along. Just like, every one of your premises, sometimes we call them claims, sometimes we call them other things. These are all part of that. And so, as we go on this, you got to work them out sometimes. So let's defend the basic premises with arguments of their own. Once you spell out your basic idea, you need to defend it. Okay, so each premise sort of becomes a conclusion and a point of further argument that you need to work out. When we look back at the argument about other planets, it begins with the premise that solar systems are already being discovered beyond our solar system. This is where you would say, in your argument, one of your first premises would say, and you would cite all kinds of scientific evidence and news reports that there, it's not just me saying this. There are other people out there, and we know it. There are other planets out there. Each premise becomes the conclusion of a further argument that, again, will be worked out even more. I put that down twice because that's twice as important. So, and as we keep going, once you've spelled this out, now for anyone who disagrees, okay, and for anyone who doesn't know much about the question in the first place, each premise is going to become, even further a good point. And when you look at this argument, it's going to be even more important as you continue. the argument would begin then with the premise that solar systems are already being discovered beyond our solar system. We have the evidence. So students would cite things. They do this by citing scientific literature, news reports. As of August 2011, Paris Observatory's Extraplanetary Encyclopedia lists 573 known planets and other stars. So we have a pretty definitive number. Over 50 in multi-planet. There are over 50 in multi-planet systems, and the numbers are constantly rising. So, as you think about this, therefore, other solar systems are being discovered beyond our own. We know that. Now, beyond that, we're not sure exactly what's on there. You're not trying to say there's anything more than you're in other words, you're defending your point that there are other planets. Okay, and it's sort of and you're defending a probable example. Now, the second premise for life on other planets is that if there are other solar systems beyond our own, then it's very probable that some, might be like Earth. Well, that gets a little tricky. Who knows this? How do we know this? What's the supporting argument? Here is where you're going to have to look at factual knowledge and research. And as we paid attention to the same, and if you paid attention to the same news reports, and found some good reasons to offer, the moral argument becomes sort of an analogy. In other words, our own, solar system has a variety of kinds of planets, from gas giants to small rocky and watery planets suitable for life. As far as we know, other solar systems would be like ours. Therefore, it is very probable that our solar system also contains, that other solar systems contain a variety of planets, including some suitable for life. Now, that is hard, because this is the harder part, because you can't draw a factual line here, because we don't know for a fact that there is life on other planets or other solar systems. We know they exist, but how do we know? Well, we don't, and that's where it becomes important. So on that note, we have to be you're kind of drawing into that probable aspect. Now, we continue to do this for all of our premises that we work on. Okay. You may find some work it's going to take some work to find some of the evidence, and you're going to find yourself changing premises in the basic argument. For example, even in the argument, let's say, about other, exchange programs, you might find yourself, changing the basic argument. Why, the basic argument of the student exchange programs might be used in the same way to find more premises to defend the program. Why do you think, for instance, and how will you persuade others that students who go abroad learn to appreciate other cultures? How would you find this evidence? How do we know this? I mean, we just know that it happens. So you might need to approach it from a different angle, coming up with different kinds of supporting evidence to support your point other than the other one. So some examples that might be able to help: maybe you'd look at surveys and studies that have been found in research, in research by the college or other places, or even experts who run programs that are exchange programs. There you go. In some way or the other, you will need to fill in that argument. The same goes for the second basic premise. How do we know students abroad will become person-to-person ambassadors? How you're going to have to find that argument, find the evidence for that. And then the third basic premise, of course, is that the value of mutual appreciation. Now, this may be more obvious, of course, and some quick arguments you could reasonably leave it underdeveloped. Not every premise necessarily needs extensive development, but this might be the easiest one, where you could, talk about how people who, go to other countries and live in other countries learn to appreciate and understand other cultures and so forth, and learn to develop a certain appreciation. It's also a fine occasion to make the force of the argument, the expected benefits, more vivid. Sometimes you can find some good examples, like person-to-person interviews to make it more personal, to show that there is a good connection. Okay, try it this way. Maybe making argument of, defend basic premises with arguments of their own. Try this. Appreciation leads us to see virtues in others' ways and to expect virtues even when we don't see them yet. Appreciation can also be a form of enjoyment. It enriches our own experience. When one sees or expects virtues in others' ways and finds that they enrich their own experience, we are less tempted to make harsh or single-minded judgments about them, and we can work with them more readily. In other words, understanding others' ideas and virtues and so forth is certainly a bridge to helping develop an understanding. So mutual appreciation will help us coexist and cooperate in our interdependent world, as we will understand each other, have an understanding of how each other communicates and how each other understands the other person's argument or the other person's life a little more. And I think that's one of the things that has come out of things along the way, is that now this doesn't mean you're going to actually always find 100% agreement with everything, but what this does is as you defend something, you might find things that aren't so defensible, and when you do, you're going to come back and say, well, maybe that isn't necessarily the case. The thing you have to also consider is you have to consider objections. When we take one side, too often when taking a side, one only takes, for example, the pro argument or the con argument. And very often, this kind of leads to, what can be said in support. In other words, additions, it's kind of interesting. Additions tend to become as a shock. We realize maybe a little late that we did not think enough about possible problems. Okay, so in other words, when you come at an argument or come at a issue or a topic, don't be so closed-minded, or closed-minded isn't the word. Don't be so afraid to look at the other person's side, even if you disagree, because you want to be able to understand the other side, even if you don't agree, so that at least you understand what arguments they're going to make against your topic. And so it's better to do this yourself. Hone your argument. Maybe even make fundamental changes in advance if you find that you might need to fine-tune your points. If you do this, it's clear to you, then your audience, that you have done your homework. And if you don't, then, if you don't do your homework, then, it may not be clear that you really tried to explore this issue with an open mind, and therefore people may not necessarily want to further read your argument or anything else you might want to read, which is not what you want to do. Consider the best arguments in opposition to the arguments that are for or against the conclusions you're working with. In other words, anticipate what the other side may come up with. Okay, it's not a game of war necessarily, but it's a way to kind of consider other issues. There are other things that can happen. Most actions can have many, many effects, not just one. Some of the other effects perhaps are even less desirable. There's not always one conclusion to every issue. Thoughtful and meaningful people sometimes may oppose and obviously good ideas, obvious that are to us, and we're trying to understand why would they do that. For example, taking ourselves in for regular checkup or getting married in order to be happy, or sending students abroad or whatever. Some of these arguments that we've talked about in the past might be obvious, but they're not to others, and so don't fall into the trap that the arguments that you're making are just obvious, because people will not take that for granted, and now you want to anticipate and honestly consider their concerns too. you don't want to just say, yeah, this is what they think. No, 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 no. You want to really do that. Students abroad may also end up in dangerous situations and bring in large numbers of foreign students. In other words, student exchange programs may bring people in that could be considered objectionable, not necessarily culturally, but since 9/11. And believe it or not, I can't believe it's been 20 years, but since 9/11, that has been in that post 9/11 world, more people have become more and more afraid of the world. And I think that's the issue. I say afraid of the world. Most people, what they're afraid of is they're afraid of the unknown. And that's what's really something. So consider their claims. Are students abroad going to end up in dangerous situation? That's true. They could. And depending on where students may be going, it may develop into a situation where, could become a U.S. National security risk in that case by bringing in foreign students. I think once they're vetted, I don't think that's such a big deal. The issue here, too, is that by going abroad, American students often could become targets. That's what other people might think. I don't think that's the consideration. I do remember, 20, 30 years ago when I was in an exchange program, I went to Germany for a while, and I remember some of the things that happened at that time in April of 1986. And look up the timeline. April 1986, Chernobyl blew up. The Germans, we were still in the Cold War. We were in an East-West Germany situation. With that, the question then becomes, program might cost a lot of money. How do we justify it? Are the high costs worth it because there are also costs of not reaching other people? I mean, there's going to be a genuine argument here. After all, we are ready to send large numbers of people. The other question is people can make too is like, well, wait a minute, we're sending large numbers of people overseas already in the military into extremely dangerous situations. Sending people into non-dangerous situations might be a better alternative. I don't know. You could argue that giving ourselves and other a different face abroad might be a good investment in public relations. So again, anticipating what objections might be, especially in the face of today when we think about budget cuts and so forth. And so when you're reading your arguments, whatever your premises are, you're going to want to be able to anticipate some of the possible objections that are going to be on your position. And that's going to be something that you might want to. Other objections may lead one to think of, other objections might lead you and other people to rethink your argument here. Worries about national security might require one to be careful about how one is invited to come into the United States. That has become much more of an issue in the last 20 years. How else are we going to correct false impressions? And that's where you might say, well, this is how you might want to maybe enter the argument and say, we have to be able to show that by sending some of our people overseas in a different situation might actually be a better situation than the way that people mostly see Americans, which is usually through military. Okay. Argue. How else are we going to correct? Yeah. We did that. Now, another thing too is maybe you are making some general philosophical claim that humans have or don't have free will, and that maybe you want to make some kind of argument here. I don't know if that's such a good idea. Or say that war is or is not inherent in human nature, so that there is or is not life on whatever you want to say. Maybe it's the opposite of what we've been talking about. But if it is, again, you have to consider both sides of the argument. Anticipating, if you are writing an academic paper, look for criticism of your claim or of your claim or interpretation. In other words, look for that possibility. That think of the possible objections in the class readings or in secondary text or reliable online sources online. Look for those other ones. Talk to people who have different views. Go through concerns and objections that might come up. You know, your colleagues might come up with something and say, well, wait a minute, pick the strongest one of the most common ones. Try to answer them in your mind. Think about that. And don't forget that you might have to reevaluate your own argument. You know, do your premises or conclusions need to be changed or developed to take account of objections? And you should consider that overall, because as you write larger papers and more directed ones, you're going to want to take into account those other objections. It's good to have a focus. It's good to have a thesis statement and your supporting arguments, but you also have to be able to consider those objections. And on that note, I bid you good afternoon.